rolling. Well, you mentioned you brought some people on from Foley Square to Sam. What were you looking for in other writers that you were bringing into that writer's room?
Well, the two gals I really I brought because I'd worked with them already, and we had become friends, and there was a comfort level there. I brought some newbies on, some real newbies, and and then somebody who was fairly seasoned. But I just thought, there could be a fresher approach if there's a lot of, people who'd never done this before and read some spec scripts, like give somebody a break and, maybe just break out of the sort of hackneyed mold of joke, 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 joke. It worked for the most part, but made the job harder in a way, because I was learning and I was also teaching at the same time. So, the support in the writer's room that you need, to be able to get your work done and get in your car and be home in time to, maybe see the evening news. That kind of support really wasn't there in the first year.
And in terms of your own process, I mean, are you a visual person, a verbal person? Do you work better by yourself, or did you have like a reader that you bounced things off of?
I'm a very verbal person. My writing reflects that. Characters, have very long speeches often. You can call Candace Bergen and ask her about that. In the later years, she was putting half the speech, on her inside bill of her baseball cap or inside her coffee cup, while she was on stage, just to be able to remember the words. But I like words. I like hearing people talk. I just really like dialogue. I've learned to become a visual person now that I'm in the film business. You don't need to be quite as visual when you're doing half-hour comedies. There's only so many shots, so many places you can put a camera, and my husband is an ex-art director, and so I learned real visual style from him. Has really come in handy just in set decoration and knowing what you want a set to look like. But by and large, it's all about the words for me.
What was Joel's involvement? I mean, did you work as a team in terms of the creative aspect of things, or was he sort of more in the background? Or the dog, the squeaky toy. Sorry.
It's okay.
We cut until he comes back. Okay, cool. You start rolling. So, yes. So
just pull the squeaker out of one. Is that what you did?
The container.
Oh, the container. Good.
So we were just talking about Mr. Shukovsky's role in this partnership or this venture. What was his function?
Well, we were partners in a production company. I did the writing. He really functioned as a producer, non-writing producer. Joel's always been kind of the architect of the whole Diane and Joel go to Hollywood thing, I would probably still be in New York just writing who knows what, just trying to still break in, I don't know. But it was really Joel who said, no, we need to go out there now and do this. And so when we formed our production company, I took more of the creative end of it because, as we both discovered, television is a very, very writer-driven medium as opposed to film. And he took more of the, producer's hat, running the company, keeping an eye on budgets. But because Warner Brothers was sort of the big dad, a lot of what Joel does was being done also by the studio. So it wasn't until we left the studio and became our own studio that he was really able to fulfill his potential. But he was always a great sounding board for all of it, and always would pick out the one thing that if you change that, the whole thing clicks together. He just had that sort of uncanny ability to do that.
I heard Steve Allen had that too. He couldn't tell you what was right, but he could tell you what was wrong.
Ah,
Do you like
right.
that?
Yes, yes.
Were there any examples of times that you came to him with a script or a problem in a story and a conflict that he resolved?
Oh, example things are always hard for me because then I have to really go back into the memory bank and try to remember. I'll come back to that because
maybe
it
as
was
we go.
we were really you get into that. It's not I wouldn't call Murphy a war zone at all. It was the most wonderful experience. Just really really wonderful experience. But I would have to reach back for a specific example of that because it was pretty much day to day, every hour of the day. Especially when you're, looking at a run through or just deciding how is this woman going to look? What do we want her to look like? I have a good example. Okay, so, and I've told this story a lot. Barnett Kellman was our director on the pilot. And we were casting it, and we were getting very, very, very close to the time when we had to shoot the pilot, and we still did not have the role of Miles Silverberg cast. And it was driving us crazy because the casting people kept sending us, and the networks kept sending us, just real on-the-nose geeks. And it's just not what I wrote, and it's not what I wanted for that character. And we could not find this character who was really essential to the story, especially in the pilot. And we kind of made a pact, Barnett and Joel and myself, that all three of us had to agree on an actor before we would cast that person. And so I think we were just 3 or 4 days away from starting production, and we still didn't have our Miles. Maybe it was like a week, but really close. And there was another actor that Barnett and I liked, and he was not what I wrote, but he was really good. And I would have to rewrite the part for him, and it was Greg Gurman. And Barnett and I really loved him. He was so quirky and, all right, so he won't be Jewish, and he won't be this, and he won't be that, but he'll be what Greg Gurman can bring to the role. And we had to make a decision almost overnight because Greg was going to go to Connecticut to do a play that he was contracted to do, and wouldn't be able to do the pilot unless we told him that next morning. And so we agonized over it, absolutely agonized over it. And Joel decided not to cast his vote in favor of Greg. He really liked him a lot, but he felt like I had a vision and that person was out there. And Barnett and I ganged up on him, and we said, we've got 5 days left. We're going to wind up with so-and-so, if we don't cast this guy. No, I'm sorry, I don't cast my vote. We wanted to kill him. We really wanted to kill him. And he and I had a very bad night together that night. I said,
Someone
this is
was on
it,
the
this is
couch.
our shot, you're ruining it. So the next morning, we all got back into the office, and I said to Barnett, Joel does not vote no. Joel, what's crazy? You're crazy. And so there were a new batch of tapes had arrived, and we started looking at those. We just pop them into the machine, and they're going and going, and it's one bad actor after the next. I'm sure they weren't bad actors, they just weren't right for the part. And Barnett and I are chatting, and this guy comes onto the screen, and it's our guy, it's Grant Schad, and we started gravitating toward the screen, and he was absolutely perfect. Where's this guy? Quick, where's he from? He's in New York. Well, call him, let's get him out here. So he comes out on a plane the next morning, and he reads for us, and he's absolutely the guy. So now we have to bring him to the network. He's the last one being cast. And Joel took him out and shopped for his wardrobe for him, his pants, his glasses. We just got him together because we really wanted the network to say yes. And so we put him in the room, and he came out thinking, it's just a trip out to LA. I'm going to read for this pilot. I won't get it. I'll go back to my life in New York. I'm going to crash with a friend, and then go. So he literally brought nothing with him. And he got the part, and we went into rehearsals 2 days later That was a Friday. We went into rehearsal on Monday. Suddenly he was in a fancier hotel, and he used his per diem to buy some clothes and underwear and stuff. He didn't even have a driver's license that was up to date. Joel had to take him to the DMV, and so he could drive himself back and forth, get him a whatever interim thing. And he became such a huge part of the show, and it was because Joel wouldn't let us compromise.
Talking a bit more about casting, I mean, they say if it's not on the page, it's not on the screen, but I know that you put a lot of time into the casting of Murphy Brown, and was Candice Bergen someone you had in mind from the beginning?
No, I tend not to write with anybody in mind. It's odd. I know a lot of people do, and it makes it easier, but I didn't really write with anybody in mind. In fact, I had offered the part to my friend Jo Beth Williams first. She was very, very hot at the time, just coming off Poltergeist and all of that, and I just thought she'd be perfect in it. But I don't think she was ready to do television. She was building a feature career. And so Candice really wasn't even on anybody's list. The casting people would submit lists, and agencies would submit lists. She was on nobody's list because she was in between agents, too. Nobody was really actually representing her at the time. So she had just moved over to William Morris, and then they had just gotten her as a client. And her name came up, and we went, wow, that could really be great if it works. Not many people felt that other than myself and Joel and Barnett.
What were some of the concerns?
Oh, she's the ice princess. She doesn't have the fire. She doesn't have the passion. How funny is she really, And they forget. I mean, she had an Oscar nomination, for a great comedic role, and she had hosted Saturday Night Live and hung out with all those people. So we went to New York and we met with her, and we sat on the floor of her apartment and read all the parts. She read Murphy, Joel and I read the other parts, and we just decided right there in that room, that was her. We had to bring her out and had to get her the part.
And what did she bring to the role?
I think Candice brought such star power, first of all, because, I mean, everybody knew who Candice Bergen was, and it's just a huge presence that she brought. She was such a beautiful woman, and to see such a beautiful woman being so funny and making fun of herself, people just embraced her because of that. And she embodied the role so, completely. I mean, literally, you could picture her behind an anchor desk. And so there was no stretch there. And I think that it was just the perfect blend of the writing and the actress. And without her in that part, we would not have been on the cover of Time and Newsweek, in our first year. It was that combination.
As a writer, I mean, you have
to take a
something
drink
in
of water.
mind. Oh, sure, go ahead. As you're creating this and you send in the page and it's on the script, I mean, was it ever a surprise to you what would happen between the chemistry of the actors? Would they bring a new dimension that would take you by surprise when you saw it happening?
Actors are phenomenal people to me. I love actors. I am always amazed at what a really good actor can do with a piece of material and just elevate it or take it into a completely different direction that you never thought of. I think it's wrong for a writer to have a really, really strong idea of how something should sound. You have to be flexible. There are writers who, and especially if you're in the position of being a showrunner, where you really are, in many ways, a co-director, and you have the last word. And if you can't be flexible in the way you hear your material, you're not gonna get those great magic moments that come out of an actor just doing something spontaneously or putting a spin on something that you didn't hear necessarily in your head. And that great stuff happens that way. I mean, I believe in the words. I don't really like free-for-all, let's ad lib and do, that's just a sign of things out of control, or, script isn't working. But you can't be so rigid that you can only hear something one way.
Mm. I think it was interesting in the commentary that you gave about that flashback episode,
Mm-hmm.
and something little, I think physical even, that Candace was doing when she had the big wig on and it was the 70s and she was meeting Frank for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You said it was like watching Hepburn and Tracy.
Yeah, they had a great back and forth. I mean, they were good friends. They became good friends on the set. So, and it's so important. You can't make up that kind of chemistry. That has to really come from something real, especially when you're trying to sustain a series over many years. When you have great chemistry, it shows, and fun things happen. Actors feel comfortable on a set with each other, and they can invent some things. I loved going to run-throughs because there'd always be some bit of business that would be a surprise, and they loved doing that for us. Right? We were such a good audience for them, the writers. We would just laugh and just think, they were so great, and we loved them so much, and they would praise us, and it was just such a healthy environment. You all do your best work that way.
How well did you know each of the characters of that show before you went into production? I mean, to write in the voice of that character, how well were they fleshed out?
When I write, I usually write a backstory for every character that I have in my head. I may not ever use any of that backstory in the script, but I know it. I know where everybody was born, what their job history was, if they're married, what their marriage is like, whether they have kids, what their pets' names are. And I write a biography for each one that I just have in my head. And I know some actors do that too. Charlie Kimbrough, who played Jim Dial, wrote a whole biography for his character before he started to play him.
Really?
Yeah, and his was different than mine, but his wins because he's got to actually be that guy.
Wow. In terms of when you first brought this idea and you were pitching it to CBS, was there any opposition to it being a 40-year-old woman, a single woman, that it was the central focus was a woman? I mean, were any of those things problematic for the network?
Yeah, having a 40-year-old star was a problem. It still is, It just continues to be an issue, and I'm kind of devoting my career to making that go away. Although the years keep adding on, but I think the reason they bought the idea is the thing that scared them about it at the same time. It sounded different to them. It was about a woman who was a recovering alcoholic, who was very famous, who was just coming back to work after the stint in rehab. And all these things sounded like a really good story to them. And then when it came time to actually doing it, the fear factor, kicked in. So you'd start to hear things like, does she have to be 40? What if she were 30? Does she have to come back from rehab? Could it be that she was just stressed out and maybe she was coming back from a spa? And all these things that really made her unique, they started to take the sandpaper to and smooth away. The luckiest thing that ever happened to me in my career was that when we shot the pilot, we were in the middle of a writer's strike. I turned that script in. The next day, the strike happened, and I could not change a word of it. I mean, I'm a member of the Writers Guild, so could not change a word. I was only allowed to cut for time.
Wow.
And so we shot a first draft.
Wow.
And that taught me, going back to your question about actors, how great actors can take material that still needs some work and make it work. A wonderful director and great actors, because there were things I wanted to do. You see it on its feet for the first time, and you go, oh, okay, that sounded good on paper, but now I need to fix that. I couldn't fix it. And they couldn't fix it by changing words, but they could definitely act it up, act it up into another level and find places where they could make awkward moments work.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that was a first draft, very scary.
Wow. Is there anything you would have changed now, seeing it, having seen it done?
Yeah, the opening sequence just needed to be tighter. It needed to be funnier. After that, I think it kind of takes off, but it was killing me not to be able to do that.
Well, there's so much in that first episode that really sets up the character. I mean, that she's interviewing this kind of smarmy guy and, doesn't let him get off at all. There's, I think, a funny moment in the bar when she's doing the pre-interview with him, and there's kind of like a sight gag. Do you remember what went into that?
Yeah, we used to have a thing we did called close the door, because I wanted Phil's bar to be so dark. One of these, could be bright blazing sunlight outside, but you walk into this bar and it would be a typical Washington haunt, dark. And so anybody who was in there would yell, close the door, as if they were bats, and that the sunlight was going to somehow, kill them. And so there would be this lighting that we would do outside the door of the bar that was really, really, really hot. And it was almost like an E.T. moment, where the ship was landing and, or Close Encounters moment. It wore thin a little bit, so we stopped doing it after a while. There was another moment where I had Murphy ask a question and the whole bar stopped and listened, and it was kind of an E.F. Hutton moment. Had a big argument with the network guy who wanted me to take that out because he just felt it was too much like an E.F. Hutton moment and cheapen the whole, he had a big speech, cheapen the whole pilot and, too broad and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I can't do it. What am I going to write in its place, So we did it, and it got a really big laugh. Getting a really big laugh isn't necessarily a good thing, because you can get a big laugh for the wrong reason. It's easy to, do that with an audience. There's certain things that will always make an audience laugh, but I believed in that moment, and I think it really worked. And I run into that guy from time to time. We always talk about it.
There's some other old standbys for Murphy that I thought were great. Can you talk about how the opening sequence, the cold open with the song that was always changing, how that came about?
That was something I don't think anybody did either, and I don't think we realized, by deciding that we were going to do a different opening instead of a standard opening title sequence every week that was the same. We were doing something different every week with a different piece of music, different piece of Motown music. We didn't realize that we were just biting off a lot, because that was a whole separate production we would have to do and write and come up with. And so as a result, we were writing kind of a 3-act play instead of a 2-act play. It was a whole different structure. But it became a signature, and people looked forward to it. I think at that time, the show just felt different. It felt fresh for a lot of reasons, because so much that we were doing was new, and it was probably because a lot of us hadn't been in television very long and didn't know what all the rules were. So, and some of us just like to buck rules anyway. So, we would do these things, and at the time, networks would go along with it. It's like, okay, you've earned your creative stripes. We'll support you on that. It's different now, though.
How so?
Much more bottom line, much more power. I think vertical integration has a lot to do with it. You're not dealing with NBC necessarily. You're dealing with General Electric. So it's just a different mindset, and you often don't get the benefit of the doubt.
Something interesting to me about watching Murphy Brown, as I'm sure we all did, you didn't seem to pander to the audience's intelligence. You didn't. It wasn't even a question. There was an assumption that they would understand a lot of the references. Some were obscure, but it was very topical. And I mean, was there ever any criticism that you were requiring the audience to be maybe more well-read or well-versed or up on politics more than the average audience on television at the time?
Oh, absolutely. We, when we shot the pilot, you know, they put it through this bizarre testing that I'd never seen done before. Big focus groups, and you know, you go into a theater and everything's all, chairs are all wired up, and the people are all wired, and they just, there was some weird machine behind this one-way glass where they were measuring audience reaction. I thought, wow, this is how shows get on TV. This is how things can go south very easily. And so, you know, you'd sit in a focus group, and I mean, literally, I'd never done this before, and there were, you know, a bunch of people, 12, I think, behind this one-way glass, and all it took was one person saying, I didn't know who Margaret Mead was. I didn't get that joke. Oh, before you know it, every executive's writing it down, going, no more of those. You know, that's going to ruin our whole thing that we got going here. One woman said, I don't like Corky Sherwood. She's going to dumb blonde. All right, let's get rid of her. And so you really, I mean, it would happen that fast. And you'd have to really stick to your guns and go up against them and explain to them, you know, why these are the things that are going to make this show work. We would call those jokes 10%ers. We knew maybe 10% of the audience we could count on for sure to get the joke. And it turned out there were a lot more than that, you know, but yeah, we wrote up to the, we didn't want to write down to anybody. And so there was a certain audience that came to us in the beginning, and little by little more people came on.
As Murphy,
I'm sorry, I'm just
go ahead,
losing
take
my
a
voice.
drink. Well, this is good because it's a long question. Murphy became such a real flesh and blood character. I mean, she was, well, we'll get to how she was referenced in pop culture, but was there any difficulty for you in the line, where that line was moving between fiction and reality, and you know, what was happening? You were writing copy for the news, I mean, in the show, because she had to come on, FYI, and talk about what was actually happening. So, and because, you know, Murphy was so opinionated, I mean, where was that line being drawn for you between entertainment and information? You know what I'm saying? And does that make sense?
I started this project wanting to make that character as real as possible and as believable as possible. We did a lot of research. We went to CBS and spent time with Dan Rather, and he let us follow him around, and you know, we interviewed all the people that worked for him, and we talked to Diane Sawyer, and we just did a lot of deep background. Linda Ellerby was enormously helpful. People on 60 Minutes were enormously helpful, and my idea was to blur that line as much as possible between news and entertainment, fiction and nonfiction. And I think people really bought into it, you know? I mean, I had heard some scary thing that people were actually getting their news from watching Murphy Brown on Monday. We would also have to think 3 weeks ahead. So we were 3 weeks out from our broadcast time, and we did that on purpose because we were trying to be timely. And anything can happen in a 3-week period, but a lot more can happen in a 6-week period. So we tried to stay as close to our broadcast time as possible, our film date to our broadcast time. So we would try to think ahead and almost, you know, look into the crystal ball. And there were times when it was pretty scary, but we would, you know, come up with some things that then came to fruition. If you go back and look at that first season and the second season, you will hear about a war in Iraq. You will hear about Donald Rumsfeld and President Bush and Dick Cheney. I mean, it's all the same players. It's really scary. And I don't think we meant to be that timely, but you know, we as writers really had to know our stuff. We had to read the newspaper. We had to, you know, be able to do more than write jokes.
Did Murphy become at all a mouthpiece for you?
Hey, Jenny?
Yeah.
We should change teams.
We
then.
should change to. Okay. Well, this is a big topic.
Okay, I'm gonna run to the
So,
bathroom.
go ahead. Were we really close?